And this session will be looking at what we call good practice. So this session will be looking at good practice and what makes good practice in terms of our activities and what we do. In this session, I'm glad we've got two distinctive speakers. That is Dr. Geoffrey Gitau, and also we have Charlie Lewis. Dr. Geoffrey Gitau is a consultant for Afrauti, and Charlie is the counselor for the Independent Communication Authority of South Africa, ICASA. Please welcome on board, gentlemen, Dr. Geoffrey and Dr. Charlie. Please welcome. So I know we are running out of time, and we really want to make sure that we get to the meat of the issue. I'm so glad to meet my good friends, Charlie from South Africa in ICASA. We can't wait to hear from you. And so is Geoffrey. We can't also wait to hear from you. And Geoffrey being in Kenya, and we've just seen that presentation by the panelists that came in previously, so you may want to touch on your issues. So please go ahead, Geoffrey, with your presentation.
Thank you very much, Martin, and also our able panelists. I must say I'm very excited to be part of this first inaugural RoundTable, whereby we are looking at how to create an enabling environment for the adoption of ICT in an effective way, especially during this period of the COVID-19. So my presentation is going to look at the solutions and the sound practices on policy, regulation, and registration adaptations in the COVID-19 environment. So to start off, I would want to reflect on the challenges that have been identified by different people across the world and also from the panelists who have presented ahead of me. The adoption of ICT in itself is facing a number of challenges, and that has also been brought to the fore by the earlier presenters. I would like to refer to one report by Fractal Analyst 2020. In this report, the report identified that strain on infrastructure networks, construction in consumer spending, disruption of supply chain, reduced availability of components, and the all-round financial impact with reduced investments as a survival instinct is a group of challenges that have been found among the consumers and also industry players in the ecosystem of the providers of ICT adoption. Specifically, in the presentations that have come ahead, our panelists have mentioned a number of challenges, and key among them is the problem of the political will, the problem of digital skill set, the problem of pricing, especially for spectrum and products that have been provided to the consumers, the problem of consumer protection, access to devices, connectivity, cybersecurity, the problem of local content, inclusivity, automation, and collaboration. So what might be the solutions to these challenges that we're encountering? In reference to the ITU guidelines on policy and legislation and regulations, ICT policy is primarily to provide legislation and regulation. It provides out the vision for ICT and links to the national development goals. So therefore, while good legislation and regulation is essential to translation of policy into reality, governments must first identify and prioritize their policy objectives. In turn, these policy objectives have to be translated into policies, legislation, and regulatory rules that the regulator can implement. Legislation in itself is supposed to establish how policy is implemented by defining the basic regulatory principles, particularly rights to access and processes, including licensing and providing the statutory foundation and mandate for the required institutions, be they consultative or advisory or regulatory bodies, as it were. Therefore, The decision must be able to specify the financial, staffing, and reporting regimes under which the regulator is operating. It should define the regulator's functions and the degree of independence. Further, regulations, on the other hand, should be able to provide details to the legal principles and lead to the implementation of policy and policy objectives. Therefore, key in the issues of regulation is to focus on improvement of new tariff structures to ensure universal access, which I must be glad that has been brought up for, the issue of universal service, choice, and competitiveness of service. Not to mention the issue of investment and ensuring that there is fair competition to handle the problem of dominance players. Notable is a progression in the ICT regulation today, where we can say that remarkably, the regulation of ICT has progressed from monopoly, privatization, liberalization, globalization, self-regulated, deregulation, and currently now we are looking at the convergence of this regulatory environment. Focusing on a proposed model by UNESCO 2006, this model proposes that the development of policy and regulatory framework, as well as the legislative framework, must be evidence-based, so that the policy upon which these are founded must be based on understanding the ICT indicators, which are defining the environment within which a given country or locality is operating, so that the outcome will be assessed again is the same. Focusing on a model provided by Deloitte 2018, it proposes a number of regulatory approaches. One key is adaptive regulation and regulatory sandboxes, which have become popular world over, outcome-based regulation, risk-weighted regulation, and collaborative regulation, which I must say has been brought to fore a lot and mentioned a lot today. So the recommendation on sound practices must therefore be able to incorporate whatever best models that have been found across the world or proposed from the research entities, and which must be able to focus on the frameworks which must cater for the solutions and sound practices. Key among the consideration that must be given is that whatever that is proposed must be evidence-based, because there may be no one size fit all, and therefore intelligence gathering and sharing should be encouraged between the different entities that are playing part in the development of this regulatory, legislative, and also the issues of legislative framework. And therefore, this kind of framework must be adaptive. It should be agile, able to be flexible enough to achieve accessibility, consumer protection, without stifling the innovative pedestal, which of course is the outcome of a better regulatory framework. In essence, it must be able to foster collaboration in the ecosystem of ICT providers and regulators and consumers as well. Focusing on the issue of the COVID-19 pandemic, it will go down in history as the most profound pandemic since World War II. And in it has caused irreversible paradigm shift in the socio-economic practices. So the clarion call, therefore, is to leverage on the ubiquitous characteristic of ICT to provide effective ICT adoption. This is promising to be the single most powerful tool to address the emerging challenges of keeping the globe on the move and not paralyzed. Therefore, ICT policy, legislation, and regulation has no better time than now to save the world and form a new foundation for the transactional world, and not to mention the battered education sector and other service sectors. And talking about the education sector, I must appreciate our presenters, because many of them have mentioned the challenge of education sector. And when education sector is affected, it's normally time driven. And when time is lost, our children may not recover the lost time. And even some of them may drop out for good, and this may reverse the gains that have been made in the different regimes in promotion of high education standards across the world and literacy levels. Thank you very much.
Yeah, there were issues around when you talked about having an evidence-based policy and assessment. just try and explain to our attendants and attendees out there, how do you address this, and how do you advise governments to be able to collect this evidence, use that evidence, especially when they know very well it's not making sense?
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. With the evidence-based model, the focus is on gathering data on indicators on the ICT interventions that you want to see achieving results for you. Knowing very well that ICT itself is an enabler. It may not be the end in itself, it's a means to the end. And when you look at the indicators on the ICT infrastructure and enablement that the users or the people that you are targeting are able to demonstrate, it tells you on the capacity of the rollout that you want to do, will it be achieved? Because it's fundamental that the given resources that must be in place before you roll out the solution are there. Specifically, my colleague Patricia did talk about the intention of government to roll out digital education model where we had obtained laptops for primary school in the different regions. But incidentally, the infrastructure was a challenge because most of those regions, some of them did not have even electricity. So when it comes to the evidence-based, you must be able to know what is the primary infrastructure required. And then to go along with that is the issue of devices. Because right now in Kenya, most of our universities have even gone to digital training through e-learning models. But we find that most of the runners do not have access even to tablets or laptops and desktops. So most of them, we find they are using their phones. And the phones are not even feature phones. Some, therefore, even ability to roll out the content which is able to be accessed through this is not possible. So the evidence must come first. Therefore, we may not work on one size fits all, particularly in developing countries like Kenya now and others. We must be able to ask ourselves, what are the ICT indicators that pertain to what you want to implement? And what is the preparedness of the community that we are targeting in the rolling out? And I'm happy that my colleague Patricia did say that even before you think about 3G, let's think about accessibility of 3G and 4G to all the target areas, particularly rural areas. And as we are going to the Google Rooms and the other kind of innovative solutions. And I think that's the way to go. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Geoffrey.
If I may, can I toss in something else? If I can just respond to Geoffrey's points about evidence-based policy, I agree absolutely. But I think evidence-based policy is also very important to look at qualitative evidence. Indicators will tell you a lot, but it's very important if you're rolling out laptops in rural schools, you need to talk to the pupils, the educators, the communities. How's it worked? Where have been the bottlenecks and the problems? It might be lack of access to electricity to charge the devices, whatever they might be. You need to assess those, assess the bottlenecks, assess what made it work, where it worked, because that will guide policy that is nationally and contextually or regionally specific within the country going forward. Thank you.
Yes, I see that point. And just now back to Geoffrey. I told you I've accumulated enough questions for you guys. So Geoffrey, the question that we have here is, you mentioned something to do with supply chain. And you're right, there's a disruption in supply chain when you have COVID-19 and so forth. In fact, UNCTAD's report actually looks at this issue very critically, where they look at the problems that are happening physically versus what we want. So for example, we want people to buy things online. We want people to go online, click this, click that, buy things. And yet, in the border post, they are spending a lot of hours just to be able to get that COVID stamp and then to go to another country. So by the time they arrive, those goods that were intended to arrive to someone else, they've already, something has already gone wrong within that. So someone has dropped the ball in the value chain. Now, Godfrey, just coming back to your issues around the advice of how people should deal with it. So how should governments balance this? I know we've talked about coordination, collaboration, working together, but how do you get the balance when you have specific things that are moving far, far faster than others, like in the case that I've just explained, where the physical issues do not match what is being said probably in the public gallery. Please, Geoffrey.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. The question of interruption of supply chain comes very critical to the fact that whatever is being delivered across the border is essentially some of the goods that are required, not just for the basic consumption, but some of them might even be relevant to addressing the pandemic itself. And when you are held up in the queue, nobody knows the priority goods that you are carrying, and you are treated equally with everybody else. So I think key among the solutions that must be brought to the fore is prioritizing the key supply chains within the cross-border trade. Because when it comes to issues of emergency response and issues of responding to disaster, they must be guided on priorities, and therefore priorities must start with what is critical. Then you look at what is vital, and then you look at what is necessary. When you look at the grounding that occurred when the COVID-19 became a pandemic, it was wholesome, it was indiscriminative, and we were not able to figure out what was critical to remain in supply regardless of the challenges that we're going through. And I think it must be agreed and a protocol be developed across the political will that the key areas that must be sustained must be identified, must be prioritized, and should be given possibly unfettered access across the borders, regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic that you're addressing. But the necessary ones, they can be put on a lower track of response once we have handled the ones that are most critical. And I think this is going to be politically addressed because it may not be addressed technically. It is more political.